Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm Talent Director at Notion. I help our companies hire, retain, and develop their people. And I'm here with Rachel Turner, who supports across our portfolio with founder development. And maybe you can introduce yourself.
So I'm Rachel Turner. I'm the founder of a company called VC Talent Lab. And our stated mission is putting coaching and leadership development at the heart of the VC-backed ecosystem. So we work with founders and their teams as they go through the scaling journey, helping them move from being entrepreneurs to CEOs, and helping their teams and their cultures become high performing.
Great. So we're here today to talk about start, build, scale, and the leadership journey that goes across each of those stages. And we'll just go through each one and go through sort of what the personal development points are as well as the team development points are. And Rachel, if you could maybe give everyone an overview of what the Brave Warrior phase looks like.
Mm-hmm. So I wrote a book called The Founder's Survival Guide, which I know quite a few founders in your ecosystem quite like, probably because one of your founders in your ecosystem sent me a text recently saying, when you wrote the case study for the Brave Warrior, did you have a camera in my head? So I think it's in that book, there's a model of 3 styles of leadership that your growing, scaling organization is likely to require of you. So the startup entrepreneurial leadership, and I call that kind of leader the Brave Warrior. As you move into the next stage of growth, as you're scaling the business and building the business and growing the business, you really need to start thinking more like an architect, and you're building the systems and the processes to be able to take to scale the business. And then the third, as you get to maturity, the more traditional CEO type leadership, which is the strategic, the visionary, what we would classically think of when we think of leadership. The archetype I use for that is the wise monarch. So it's just an interesting point of reflection to think about where your business is, what's coming up in the next couple of years, and which of those styles is your preference and which you need to lean into. Because often when leadership starts to struggle, it's when you're bringing the wrong style of leadership to a particular challenge. So
let's talk about the Brave Warrior stage, which coincides with the start phase. So that's around 3 to 10 million in revenue and around 0 to 30 people. And this phase is usually characterized by quite a lot of chaos, not a lot of certainty. So Rachel, if we can talk about the founder mindset at this stage, and in particular, the self-awareness it takes to realize that, they are leading a team, and sort of that shift from the singular mindset to now leading a small team, but, being a leader nonetheless.
Yeah, it's a strange phase. So that phase, largely what you're going to be rewarded for is Brave Warrior leadership. So what does that mean? It means being very goal-oriented, very outcome-oriented, very focused, very determined, not particularly diplomatic, not particularly collaborative necessarily. I mean, you could be, but think about the Brave Warrior on a beach. They're going to take the gun turret or die trying, and follow me. And it's sort of and actually, as you're struggling to find product market fit, as you're struggling in those really early days, that kind of entrepreneurial fast leadership is really what the business wants from you. So it wants you to be flexible, particularly in the 0 to 10 people. It wants you to be flexible, change your ideas. But then as you start to grow a larger and larger team, as you get to sort of 15, 20, 25 people, what's going to happen is you're going to move from being what I'd call a hub and spoke manager. So there's you, or you and your co-founder, with a bunch of people who you've delegated some stuff to actually beginning to get to the point where you want to start to think about bringing this group of people together as a bit of a team. So in that phase, Brave Warriors need to learn how to delegate, how to hold their direct reports accountable, and be thoughtful about, well, when do I need to move from being hub and spoke, where I'm just directly managing a group of individuals, to actually building a team, which, depending on the business that you're in, may happen anywhere from sort of 8, 15, 20 people. Can even be further. I've got a couple of founders that I'm coaching who are still leading as hub and spoke, so just them and a couple of direct reports, when they've got 30, 35 people. So it's just, the Brave Warrior typically doesn't enjoy delegation, struggles with giving feedback, doesn't necessarily know how to facilitate a great group conversation. So those are skills that become incredibly important in the next phase of business, but you're beginning to see them come in. I think the challenge more at this stage is for people who lack brave warrior energy. So for example, if you've got two co-founders and one is that really classically entrepreneurial, salesy, visionary person, and the other person is perhaps coming from a corporate background.
Tech.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You'll often find either a corporate background or a tech background or a pharma background, not so much for Notion, but where you've got kind of more typically technical or architect or managerial people. And there's a wonderful meme on LinkedIn, which is a little girl in a spinning teacup ride at a Ferris wheel, and the tagline is, a corporate escapee on her first week in a scale up. It's like, and it just, so I think if you're in this stage and your natural style of leadership isn't brave warrior, this can be a really, really painful time.
How can a founder who fits into that bucket find their inner warrior, and have you helped founders do that?
So first of all, it's really quite unusual for a founder for a company to start without any brave warrior energy in there. So oftentimes when you've got two co-founders and one who is very brave warrior and the other who's more of the architect, even just helping them have that language and understand that there are going to be situations where they both need to lean in and lean out with their different styles can actually make it okay that there's a difference in styles. Where the times when I see a founder or founding team with no brave warrior energy, I have only really seen it in a couple of situations, and they're carve-outs. So I've seen it happen when there's a carve-out, an M&A carve-out from an organization, and then you've got sort of a founder who already had the established business and they know it's worked, or a carve-out from an incubator in a university. And the other time I've seen it work is one of my clients who had been a very successful corporate leader, but the work he was doing in that corporate stopped, so he took the whole model out and got funding for it. So it's rare to find classic startups without one of the co-founders being brave warrior.
Yeah.
1 in 10. I see that happen, maybe 2 in 10.
Mm-hmm. I think let's talk about what you said in terms of preparing some of those skill sets for the next stage, because sometimes what we see when we talk about start, build, scale is rather than being one step to the next, it's sort of up and then you sort of go slower before you can go faster again.
Absolutely.
And what are some of the pitfalls of the brave warrior phase that can sort of, rather than transitioning into the next phase, cause a founder to sort of flounder with making that jump?
So I agree with you. I think it's not that you just get to go and do brave warrior and don't have to worry about learning to delegate or manage or any of those things, and then you turn it on. But I do think there is an inflection point where you need to move from one to the other. And so I guess my first watch out for people is helping them be aware of that. So I think the question I'm always asking founders when we first start speaking to them is, what are their plans for scale and growth? And when are they planning to move from being founder-led to having a leadership team? And the point at which they're building a leadership team and the point at which they are going to create levels of hierarchy within the organization, so they're not directly communicating and managing everyone, that's the point at which they need to think about really starting to lean into the architect energy, which we'll talk about in a minute. Which, if you think about an architect, while the warrior is, hey, let's take the gun turret, the architect is thinking about blueprints. And so, if you're leading from your architect mind, you're thinking about, okay, how do we set this system up? Whether that's how do we communicate, or how do lines of management go, or where are roles and responsibilities, or how do we make decisions here? It's sort of thinking at a systemic level. And most founders really don't like that much. So I would always encourage you to hire a great COO, a great chief of staff, a great CPO, any of those people who are going to help here. But you still need to lean into that style yourself.
You can't just hire it out.
You can't, because what a lot of founders want to do is abdicate it. They don't want to delegate it. And so they'll bring in a COO, never speak to them, never show up at any of the meetings, never follow any of the protocols that the COO has set, reverse decisions when staff come to them rather than go to the COO, and then wonder why their CEO is not being successful. So that doesn't really work. So I would talk about minimally viable architecting energy. You need to give a minimally viable amount of management if you're going to be helpful at that stage. So going back to your question, I think the first thing to watch out, if you are a brave warrior, i.e. you're fast, you're goal-oriented, you're determined, you're visionary, failure isn't an option, though I think the first sort of watch out is those muscles have been the very thing that's made you successful so far, and they've been rewarded. So your leadership has been rewarded when you've been flexible, when a client has said, I don't want this, I want this, and you've shifted. When you've been very charming and salesman-like and visionary, all those things have been rewarded. And so you've used those muscles again and again and again. And it's like thinking about a body. If you've only used your right arm, your left arm starts to get quite weak. And the temptation you'll have is to always use the right arm for everything because you know how to use it and it's easiest. But when you get to the point where the business now requires you to delegate consistently, to create clarity, to create the environment where your people get what they need from you so they can achieve the success you've asked them to achieve. At that stage, the business and your team require a bit more consistency of you, a bit more thought, a bit less pace, a bit less innovation. Not saying don't innovate, but not 17 times before breakfast, you know. It's more, that's why it's called the considered architect phase. So the difficulty you're going to have is that you've got this super strong muscle that has been exactly what you've needed to use all this time, and now you need to start using the left arm. Yeah. And the temptation will be to try to double down on the things you know and are comfortable doing. So double down on innovation, double down on speed, double down on vision, double down on charm, double down on sales. And actually what the business needs from you is sometimes the opposite, which is be thoughtful, be considered, bring the team along, repeat the same message multiple times, create that clarity of message, that clarity of consistency, think about the plan. So just be aware that what's got you here won't get you there. And yeah, I think that's probably the biggest watch out.
Andy always says, and one of our operating partners always says, what made you successful at one stage will actually lead directly to your demise at the next, which is very dramatic, but
I think it's true. So I use exactly the same concept. The thing that I say is the superpowers of one stage are the kryptonite of the next. So it's the same when you come to look at when a founder needs to move from being an architect to a monarch. The things that make you a good architect make you a bad monarch too. So I agree with him completely.
Yeah. Let's talk about making that jump. So from brave warrior to considered architect and what it takes. We've talked about what it takes from the founder, but then how does the founder sort of decide who to take with them and traverse that change?
Yeah, and again, I don't think that's a binary. I don't think there is. I think there are lots of small moments. So the group of people that you need around you when you've got your hub and spoke, there's you and a bunch of people who are direct reports. And then the question that you're then asking, often I think there's 3 stages of building your leadership team. There's the hub and spoke, so you and your direct reports. That's not a team. Then you've got what I call an early stage leadership team, which basically is often too big. And it's basically everyone who reported to you. And you just tuck them all in a team.
7 to 9 people.
Well, no, 18 I've had in one team. And you've got a mixture of levels there. You've got heads of, you've got VPs, you may have a C, a co-founder, an advisor, a chief of staff. It's a real mixed bag. And then eventually, most of the time, what you end up doing is you then create your future C-suite, even if they're not all C-level employees yet. You might have a head of people rather than a CPO. You might have a head of sales rather than a chief revenue officer. But you've really got your small, what will become your C-suite. And then you've got your extended leadership team who you're still communicating with on a regular basis. I've forgotten your question.
Well, just who to take with you.
Okay,
right?
Like how do you?
Because something that comes a lot at the early stage is, often founding teams are 4, maybe 7 people we've seen, and not everyone necessarily has the same energy, interests, or ambition to sort of take it to the end. So, how can founders begin to formulate that leadership team and even co-founding team, and some of the difficulties that come around just the dynamics of that, because it's something that we just see pretty consistently across the board.
I think this, like a lot of things, is forewarned is forearmed. It's really interesting. I don't know if you've read the book Super Founders. So Super Founders is a report of a bunch of research they've done in the US to look at why some founders consistently create unicorns and decacorns. And they've tested some of the kind of typical venture capital hypotheses, i.e., does being related to your co-founder, is that a bad thing? It's not. It's not a predictor of failure. It's actually, there is many co-founders who are related. Another one has being at an Ivy League university. Is that a predictor of success? And it's not. The biggest predictor of success in the Super Founders book that they found in their meta-analysis is a founder who's done it before. Not being successful before, but been through the process before. And I think that's because you know the pitfalls that are about to hit you. So I think a lot of what we're trying to do is just show people, and you're doing the same thing, is show people the pitfalls they're likely to come across in the next 12 months so they can strategize around it. So for example, if you know that the movement from your founding team to your mature C-suite is going to require quite a few of your original team to be leveled or managed up or managed out, if you're having that conversation right at the beginning, so the very first time you start to think about changing your founding team, if you're having a conversation to say the team is going to go through 2 iterations from where we are today to the C-suite we'll need to be in 2 or 3 years' time. The first is that we will have an extended leadership team, and you'll probably be on that if you're a head of or a VP, so there'll be a large team. Over time, as we hire C-suites above you in your role, it's likely that you'll move to become a member of the extended leadership team. If you're letting them know that journey is likely to happen, it's much easier down the line to deliver the news that you're about to be leveled, then you're not going to report directly into the founder. If you don't message it ahead of time, you've got difficulties. And then there are just the other management challenges of, what do you do when somebody, you've got a great, helpful generalist in your early stage? Because that's the other thing.
That's what you need.
Exactly. Yeah. And as you scale, you're going to hire specialists. And the roles for helpful generalists who love the brand become fewer and fewer. And so those are those just tough management conversations, which is when you look at the people who report to you, and you look at what the business requires moving forward, is there a space for them that they need to be managed up or managed sideways or managed out? And that's an individual conversation, which is going to depend on a person by person basis, and that there's going to be tough conversations. The other thing which is interesting as well is that as you grow even further, and this is where I don't think this is necessarily something for an early stage founder to think about, but as you get past 40, 50 people, that's when you probably want to do some work on your people ops. And there are interesting things that I've got one founder, for example, who changed their scales. And so they've got a scale, a kind of a set of scales for managers and a set of scales for individual contributors. So you can still be a level 5 as an individual contributor. Yep. So these are sort of things that you can do at a systems level.
More process.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think, those are interesting questions for you to have with your head of people, or, someone like Juby, for example, who does people ops at a later stage.
Mm-hmm. But that 40 to 50 jump is when things begin to feel a little bit less like a tribe or a band of pirates. And I think we see a lot of our founders see the difference between 50 and 60 people as being quite stark. So I think that's a good segue into the considered architect mode and the build phase. And this is when, as you were saying, you're moving from specialist to generalist, or generalist to specialist rather. And a lot of change happens. And how do you characterize that? And B, I think a few things that we could talk about is the first team dynamic. How do you create a first team and work on the dynamics around that, and then really keeping the secret sauce that made you successful at the first stage and scaling that culture.
Yeah, there's a huge amount there, isn't there? I think the first thing to say, because I look at it all through the lens of the role of the journey of the founder. That's my thing. I think the first thing to say is I'm not in any way suggesting that entrepreneurial leaders should give up being entrepreneurial and start to try to become operational leaders. If you're 6'6" and you want to take up a sport, it's going to be more advisable for you to take up basketball than trying to be a jockey, because your natural strengths and abilities will give you an advantage there. If you are a natural entrepreneur, you are compelling, visionary, great at selling, quite influential, good at risk, good at innovation. So you should really try and orient your role as much around that as humanly possible. And the business might need you to ride a horse. So you don't try and be a jockey, but do learn to ride a horse. And so the thing that I would say, because most brave warriors don't want to do the considered architect thing. They just want to delegate that and jump straight to being a wise monarch, where they can just be visionary a bit more. But they don't really like the kind of the day-to-day operational grindy management thing. It's not their cup of tea. So we're not trying to make you do that all day, every day. One thing that I would say though is, as you enter that stage as an entrepreneurial founder, if you spend 10% of your time giving the team what it needs in terms of managing your direct reports, showing up and leading effective team meetings, giving feedback, running a cadence of operational, tracking. If you give 10% of your time to that, it will generally free up 90% of your time to do other things. If you don't, you're going to spend up to 90% of your time dealing with things that have gone wrong. People problems, lack of alignment, person A disagreeing with person B. You're going to be dealing with people problems all the time. So it's a little bit like preventative medicine. You don't like it, but just swallow 10% of the
Slows
medicine.
You down a little bit,
yeah,
so that you can
exactly.
go faster.
Precisely. Because the other option is that you ignore that need, the need your team have, and then you're going to be dealing with the consequences of that, and that's going to take up all your time, and you're going to hate it. So
let's talk a little bit about that, actually, the people problems, because you have a framework that I think has been really helpful around the Kaufman drama triangle, and this just speaks to something that comes up a lot around feedback conversations, and sometimes we're pulled in at a point where it's a little bit too late. So how can founders, like you were saying, get ahead of it, but also manage those conversations using the framework that you have?
Yeah, so the Karpman, I would love to say it's mine, it's
Karpman.
not, but
Yeah.
that's okay. So Karpman was from a school of psychology called transactional analysis, which is the psychological study of interpersonal relationships and communication. And he identified that people move to three modes of communication under pressure and when they're trying to get power within an interpersonal relationship. And he called the three roles the three edges of the Karpman drama triangle. And it argued that once you've taken up a position in the Karpman drama triangle, you're just exacerbating the drama. So somehow you need to find a way to get out of it. So the three types of communication pattern are the victim mindset. It's not my fault, they did it. The perpetrator mindset, do what I say, you idiot. And the rescuer mindset, which is, I can fix it, I'll be helpful. Now, I've described those in extreme. Of course, most of us aren't that extreme, but we will be on one of those continuums. So, for example, I start by trying to fix things. So I'll be like, oh, that sounds awful, let me help. And then when that doesn't work, I'll start to get a little bit snappy and snarky, and I'll go a little bit like, other people that you're managing may start out with, oh, I didn't know, well, he's doing that and she's doing that. And actually, so what I don't know if I can really do it justice in a short video, but basically, if you think about your natural style, you probably cleave. And what do you go to? Are you a natural rescuer, victim?
Yeah. Okay. I'm a fixer.
You're
Everything's
a fixer.
Okay.
Okay.
We got this.
So imagine that you're like, think of a girlfriend calling you saying, I don't like my boyfriend and he's like this and as another fellow rescuer, I would imagine that you will probably say, and when people think about their staff, just use this analogy with your staff, but I imagine you and I would probably say to a staff or a member of our team who isn't struggling, that sounds awful, let me know how I can help. Have you tried this? Have you tried that?
Here's a 10-step plan
what
for what
about
you should
here?
do.
Here you are, let me fix it for you. We think we're being helpful. What we don't recognize is that the victim is getting a payoff by being a victim. They don't really want to not be a victim, because when you're a victim, nothing's your fault. No one expects much of you, and everyone offers to help you. So it's really working. So when we hear a victim, we think they must want to feel better, but actually they don't want to shift from their position. And all we're doing by helping is reinforcing it,
yeah.
Right? So what we will then tend to do is say, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have you tried that? Oh, And then the victim says, you see, everybody's so nasty to me. And we're just the ultimate self-fulfilling prophecy. Similarly, if you try to rescue somebody who's being very aggressive and blaming other people in that perpetrator mode, again, what we will do is, oh, okay, oh, I can see you're not feeling, okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow then. Oh, don't speak to him right now, he's very angry. Oh, better not say that, he doesn't like those things, or she doesn't like those things. So again, we're colluding. So we are preventing the person getting any feedback about the negative impact of their behavior. So most people, when they think of managing people or think of giving feedback, they tend to think of either being a perpetrator, like telling someone off, or trying to be a rescuer, like fixing them. And they don't recognize that actually what they need to do is get out of the triangle completely. And this is true whether the feedback you're giving is to someone you're directly managing, or a co-founder, or a stakeholder. And so there are very simple ways of sharing feedback, which is not blaming anyone, not saying it's your fault like a perpetrator would, but it also isn't colluding with them. And so we use a very simple 3-step model of feedback where there's some preparation work to do, which I would recommend have a look in the book, and I think we've got it on one of your handouts as well. Some preparation to do before you give feedback. So think about, what is the problem? What specifically do I want that person to do differently? Because oftentimes we can't answer those questions. We're just a bit annoyed with somebody.
General.
Yeah. But actually, if you said, well, specifically, what is it that they did? And specifically, what is it that you'd like to ask them to do? A lot of the time, I did this recently with somebody, and I was like, specifically, what did they do? And I was like, they rolled their eyes. I'm like, it's not really a sacking offence, is it?
Imagined or can
Exactly.
as well, right? Yeah.
So you go through that process first of specifically what did they do, and exactly what is it that I'm going to ask them to do differently. Mm-hmm. And then you prepare really good quality feedback for the person, and you use the framework, I noticed that, or when you. So when you rolled your eyes in the meeting. And the second part is the impact was. I noticed I got quite upset. I felt quite offended, or I wondered about your level of engagement. And my request is, if you're not happy with what we're talking about, please say something or come and talk to me. But I would ask you to not roll your eyes in team meetings. Is there anything that I need to know? So, there are lots of different structures for this kind of feedback, but I think a lot of times we don't learn it in our normal life. And so finding a way that you can prepare and deliver that kind of feedback is crucially important as you move from warrior to architect.
I think it's what you said earlier as well, around you need to tell people what's coming, and you need to sort of over communicate, and that just, I think, is so true with feedback as well, because the longer you leave it, the sort of scarier it gets to be the person delivering the feedback, but also the one receiving it.
Well, it's part of the reason why we don't like feedback, because we avoid it in our everyday life. We are not used to giving it without it being angry or upset. So normally we don't say anything, it's always like this, or and then the emotions. So we just don't know how to deliver feedback in in the coaching world, which we call charge neutral tone. So, I noticed when you rolled your eyes.
Emotion.
Or I noticed when you rolled your eyes. We're just not used to that. We're not used to being able to say, I noticed when you rolled your eyes, that charge neutral. So it takes a bit of practice at getting used to delivering feedback. But honestly, you do it 4 or 5 times and it's really easy. And your team appreciate it because they know where they stand. Your frustration level drops down. But also just to say, no one's perfect. Like, I really got it wrong about 3 weeks ago, and I've been doing it for 20 years. I got it so badly wrong, like epically wrong. Really bad, really bad. So we're human.
Nobody's perfect.
No one's perfect.
Just in terms of relating that to the first team dynamic, because again, change is difficult. People generally don't like change. Something that happens going from start to build is, in response to change, sometimes people have a threat response, right? Especially if you're in a peer group where maybe some of them have been part of the company since the very beginning, or some have joined externally. How can founders build that first team, and how can they start building some of those whys or considered architect?
So the first thing to do, and it's sort of inherent in what we've just been talking about as well, but the first thing to do is recognize that your employees don't need what you need. It's one of the massive sort of bias mistakes that we make is assume that because we need something, other people need it. So we treat people the way we want to be treated. That's a really bad idea. Don't treat people the way you want to be treated. Treat the people the way they want to be treated.
Yeah.
Now the reality is, what really marks out founders from employees is that founders tend to have a very high need for freedom and autonomy. They have a higher need for freedom and autonomy than they do for certainty and clarity. So just think about that for a second. If you really needed certainty, clarity, if you got anxious if there was no certainty, you'd never be a founder, okay? If you needed freedom more than anything else, then being an employee in a large organization is going to make you really miserable. So you tend to find that founders have a higher need for freedom and therefore a higher comfort with risk. So, and they don't need managing and they don't want to be managed. So being managed for a founder is like, you're not the boss of me. Right, so they tend to assume that other people need those things and want to be treated the same way. However, if I've taken a job rather than start my own business, it's because I want a job. I want clarity and certainty more than I want freedom. Now, obviously, someone who's taken a job at a startup has a slightly less...
The appetite's different.
Appetite's slightly different than if you're going to go and work for American Express, but still, they haven't started their own business. So they don't need what you need. So they do need more clarity. They do need more communication. They do need clear guidelines. They do need to know what success looks like. So whether you're communicating the plans for the organization, communicating your expectations for them in role, communicating how you'll know they've been successful, communicating what your expectations of them are in a team meeting, they need more clarity and guidance than you would value. And that's doubly true when you're taking a group of people like that, through people who've got those needs through any kind of transformation and change. Is over communicate, the clearer the better, and reiterating the message again and again. I mean, you and I do a lot of work with the table group, and Alan at the table group will talk about the fact that once you've worked out what you're communicating, you need to communicate it 7 times.
Yeah.
For people to get it. I remember the first CEO I've ever coached said, Rachel, I know, and he was leading a global organization. He said, I know that my message has got across, but I'm so bored of saying it. I want to deafen myself. I can't bear saying it anymore.
Surely people have it at this point.
Exactly. So it's the same message repeated over and over and over again. So over-index on clarity, over-index on communication. You may think you've said it, say it another 3 or 4 times and say it the same way. And people really appreciate that as they're going through the transformation. Mm-hmm. You asked a question about culture as well.
Yeah.
So it's really, I can tell you what not to do. Don't go off with your co-founder, come up with 4 words, stick them on a mug and then say, here we are, we're all innovative, while smashing anyone who challenges anything you say, because that doesn't work. You already have a culture. At the beginning, it is really a function of your co-founder and your founding team. It's there. It's the things that you value, the things that you do more of, without it being stated, that exists. That is the culture, and it will take its own form until you get to the point where there's probably a layer of management between you and everyone else. So when you're directly communicating, so probably up to 20 people. It probably doesn't need much formalization.
Because they're still coming from you. Yeah.
Exactly. But as you start to put a layer of management between you and everybody else, and you get to that 40, 50%, the thing that was happening naturally, because values were being communicated every minute of every day around a big table where you all worked on things together, they need distilling into a set of messages and behaviors that will take that culture from being ineffably in the air to something that exists here, here, and here. So do an exercise on culture and do an exercise on cultural values, but do it well. I can't tell you, your people, if you go into a room with your co-founder and just come out and now tell people they value this, they just laugh at you and it'll make no difference whatsoever. It really has to be
very sincere,
thoughtfully done, preferably engaging your people in the process of formulating the values, and then rolled out very thoughtfully and hardwired into your processes. So, if you say that in an organization, you value innovation, you value collaboration, you value bravery. You need to be thinking about those things when you interview people, when you're promoting people, when you're giving them their annual performance review, in your one-to-ones. You also need to think about how brave, innovative companies, how that shows up in in their office space and in their onboarding process and in their systems. I mean, it needs to live in everything that you do. So it needs to be quite a thoughtful thing. But most founders think it's 4 words on a cup and then, can I just get a door and stick it up as a desk because that'll show everyone we're frugal, which is the story you hear an awful lot
all the
about
time.
Amazon,
The door
right?
as a desk.
Yeah, exactly. The door as a desk.
Yeah, I think the question we get a lot is just how to scale it, right? Like it's never in those words. It doesn't feel the way it used to anymore. Or we're hearing from some of our team that just doesn't feel like a startup anymore. So how should a founder respond to that?
It's not a startup anymore. I mean, the reality is you're moving from being a speedboat to a yacht to a super tanker, right? That's what you're doing. And yachts don't feel like speedboats. They feel like yachts. So embrace the yacht. And of course, the values that you've got at startup, the value can stay the same, but it will feel different at different stages. So, what it means to be bold when there's 8 of you, and what it means to be bold when there's 100 of you, and you're trying to also be effective is a different thing.
Evolves, yeah.
Like transparency. When there's 4 of you, transparency is really easy. When there's 300-400 of you, you want to be transparent and appropriate. You don't want to do an all hands going, we're a bit worried because we just lost a big client. You might all be fired next week. And we don't know but hey, we don't know. Yay! That's not helpful. That's not a helpful level of transparency. So it's not a startup. It's a scale up. It's a build company. And that's okay. The question is, how do you keep the essence of those values, and what do they look like at a company of this stage?
And some of this has to do with, actually, we should talk about the self-mastery sort of cycle and how you begin to, as a founder, recognize elements of yourself that, energy level and sort of how you are received.
I love working with Notion because I know that the people who are going to see this are at the stages of growth and the stages of evolution where they'll still be interested in it. What's really difficult is that when I'm introduced to a founder who's been given over 100 million, their appetite for any of this is really, really minimal.
Really?
Because someone's come along and said, oh, you're a brave warrior, here's 100 million. Well,
they've
done.
gotten positive reinforcement.
I've only had positive reinforcement. Yeah. So they've used is the same muscle again and again and again and again.
And that's gotten them 100 million.
And it's got so big now that there's this withered limb and this huge, massive, like Hulk arm. And the idea of using this for anything is just an anathema to them.
Yeah.
So having the conversation really, really early, knowing what the journey is likely to require of you, beginning to get curious. So one of the things that we do when we start with founders, we do a variety of psychometric assessments, which help them understand their natural preferences for leadership. And then you can look and you can say, well, here's what the psychometric says. We could also do 360 interviews where you hear from other people about the impact of a founder's behavior. So our first job is to help bring the subconscious preferences to the surface. That's what we do in coaching. So here's what your superpowers and your strengths are and how you like to lead. And here's what you're going to do in the business for the next 2 years. So the likelihood is, if this is your preference and this is what the business is going to require, here are the things that might be difficult and here are the things that we need to help you move around. So I think it's much easier to talk about the challenges you're likely to face in the future than say, by the way, you're failing here, by the way, you're failing there. So again, much easier to have the conversation at the point at which someone raises a Series A and
about
say,
what's coming.
Look what's coming, rather than, by the way, you've just fallen in the hole again. Because there's something a bit judgmental when you're trying to fix a problem that exists.
Yeah.
It's much more difficult. You want to get ahead of the problem. And I always jokingly say, that lovely saying that this sort of that build stage is like the rattling rocket ship phase, or that you are building the plane as you fly it. I always joke that, here are the needs of the business, and the founder and the founders are normally like one step behind, trying to play catch up. And what we're always trying to do at VC Talent Lab is get you one nose ahead, so you know what the business is going to require of you next, so you can get ahead of the curve. Now, so that's sort of the general theme. The two self-care things that, and the two sort of self-awareness things that we work on almost invariably with all founders are understanding your internal blocks of success. And this really is the thing I'm really passionate about. If life was as simple as know what to do, know what I want and know what I need to do to get there. So, if life is as simple as, well, I want to, have a company with 100 million ARR. Okay, this is what I need to do. Great, I'll go do that. If life was as simple as that, we would all have lower BMIs and bigger pension pots, because the reality is we can know what we should do, but we go into the business and then the 90% of our brain, which is subconscious, 90% of your brain is beyond your conscious control. So you might think your little conscious brain, hey, I've got this.
We're going to do this.
Yeah. Your subconscious is going, I ain't doing that. I'm going over here. So first thing is to recognize like the subconscious blocks of success. And those are typically going to be ego needs, fears, negative beliefs. So we do a lot of work with founders, excavating what those things are and giving them really simple hacks so that when they happen, they know how to sort of protocols and hacks.
What are some examples of those? I've never heard of that before.
There's one section of the book which is about self-mastery and mind mastery, which is all around this. So to give you an example, we all have psychological needs. Part of our psyche formed in childhood. We don't need to go into it. I'm not a therapist. I trained as one, but that's not what I do. But say, for example, you have a founder who has, let's pick a core need for freedom. And that may be because they grew up in a family where they had very bossy parents, or they didn't get much freedom, or it could be the opposite. They had loads of freedom. So, but that need was probably formed in the first 7 or 8 years of their life. And it just sits in the subconscious and informs everything they do. Now what will happen is that if there is a situation in the business which threatens the founder's need for freedom, i.e. the chief revenue officer disagrees with them about a go-to-market, or the head of product tells them they can't do something that they want to do, or they've got to show up for a bunch of regular cadence management meetings which are quite boring. All of these things impinge on the freedom. If a founder doesn't know that that's what's going on, what they will experience is frustration, and it'll be their fault, and then they'll get angry, and then they're likely to trigger into a whole set of shadow behaviors, which are subconscious, unconscious ways of behaving, which typically have a negative impact. So a founder with a core need for freedom might just start missing management meetings, or not paying attention to the meeting, or just being on the email because they can't be bothered listening to this, or just rather than engaging with their chief revenue officer, chief product officer to have a conflict debate, have a really good debate, they might just ride roughshod over them and say, no, we're doing it my way. And all of those things mean that they end up getting less of what they actually need. So if they're going to be more drawn into dealing with conflict, because it's like we were saying earlier on, give the 10%, you get 90% freedom back. So, or I'll give you another example. If you're a people pleaser, that's an ego need for approval, okay? That's mine, by the way. And I know it comes because I was a fat, unpopular only child. Go figure. So I know where it comes from. But the way it triggers me is that sometimes if I'm walking into a room, I'm facilitating a team offsite, and I know they're not happy, and I know they don't want to do the work we're doing, and I know they're a little bit sniffy about coaching. Being there at all. Yeah. Like, my initial reaction, if I don't manage myself, will be, and then I'll go into the room, my shadow behaviors will come out. My shadow behaviors in that situation are, I will become a bit jazz hands and a bit vacuous and a little bit like an avoidant, and I won't be very brave, and I'll say what I think people want to hear. And if I do that, it's a dreadful meeting and I end up with no approval. So I have to do the opposite of what I want to do. What I want to do is going, oh, no problems, okay, yeah, yeah, I get it. what I actually have to do is sit back and say, yeah, it's really tough, isn't it? Let's go there. Now, while I say that, if I'm ever facilitating a team session for anyone in your ecosystem, if there's conflict, please know on the inside I'm going, oh my God, no one loves me. But I'm managing it, and I'm not allowing that to inform my behavior. So I am managing my need for approval. So those are a couple of examples. So understanding things like your ego needs, your shadow behaviors, your fears, your beliefs, your triggers, the things that are, what think about you on a really bad day. What do you like and what gets you there? And let's make sure we take care of that stuff, because the business needs to be run by the best version of you, not by
on a bad
7-year-old, and that's same for physical self-care. If you're a sort of champion tennis player, you could have the best shots in the world, but if you show up to Wimbledon hungover, tired, having overtrained, you won't perform. So you have to manage your thinking, which we just talked about, but also your physical energy. So the last time you and I met, I broke all my rules and I hadn't had a break for 6 months. I had very good reasons to, but I was a bit nuts. So I'm really glad we're recording it today instead. Yeah. So what are the conditions you need physically to be at your best? So mine, for example, things like I don't do a certain number of meetings without a break. I don't do over X number of calls in a day. In each 3-month period, I will take a long weekend. Every 6 months, I'll take a holiday. I make sure that I get to gym 3 times a week. I make sure that I get my step count up. I don't drink. These are all the protocols that I put in place to make sure that physically I'm able to show up at my best.
Preserving your energy.
Yeah. By the way, not everyone has to not drink, by the way. It's just much better for me if I don't.
Yeah, I think it's understanding within yourself.
Exactly.
That makes sense. I think anything else on the considered architect before we move on to wise monarch?
No, I think a couple of other things. So, the considered architect is really looking at the business and their people and their stakeholders and their clients as a system. You're building the engine, you're building the system which you're then going to go and scale. And so thinking of it like an engineer, like an architect, and that's for everything. So how do we architect culture? How do we architect the people? How do we architect go-to-market? How do we architect product development? It's always, what's the process, what's the system which is going to allow us to scale? Sort of the management element is one of it, knowing how to get high performance out of your team, how to create a high performing leadership team. But it's much, much more than that as well. It's not just managing individuals, it's thinking systemically about the business.
Yeah, it's not being too focused on one element or micromanaging, which is also something that we see just in terms of founders wanting to take back some of that control because the feeling of chaos is beginning to stress them out. But let's talk about the transition to...
Oh, can I just respond to that one though?
Yes.
That is largely a function of the fact that they don't know how to delegate. And so what they will do is manage people the way they would want to be managed. So the way I want to be managed, because I'm a recovering brave warrior, I was a founder before I was a coach. The way I want to be managed is leave me alone, give me a laptop, tell me the vision, and I will over-deliver. You'll be so happy. But I don't want to know my 90-day goals from you, not the boss of me, need for freedom. However, founders will often manage onboard people that way, and then there's chaos. And they don't realize they had expectations of what that person would do, but their expectations and the other person's expectations weren't met. So do spend time when you onboard people, having the conversation about how will they've been successful in their role in 90 days. Get really granular about it, because it's in there. Just get it out of there onto paper. So often when you spent the right time, we call that contracting. So agreeing with your direct reports what success looks like, how you're going to review progress together, when to come to you, what decisions they can make. If you spend the time doing that well, they will see less chaos and be less tempted to drag everything back. And then when they are triggered, it's often their ego needs that are triggered. Their ego need for control, or their ego need to be right, or their ego need to be important. And when those things are triggered, that's when they're likely to start micromanaging again. So if you're taking care of your ego needs and you're contracting and setting your employees up really well, that chaos doesn't happen so much, and you're far less likely to get triggered and micromanage.
Mm-hmm. Great point. So with moving on to the wise monarch, becoming an inspirational leader is not usually what, a founder's in it to do, right? They're there to build, and they have this idea that, they're the only ones in the world who can solve. So how do you see founders make that trajectory? What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen? And how can founders who are about to make that jump think about being an inspiration to other people when they haven't before?
The interesting thing is, I think it's easier. Not all founders are brave warriors, but a large number of them are. And if they're not, their co-founder is. I'd say 70% of people I come across who are founders are brave warriors. Brave warriors don't mind being don't mind being wise monarchs. They quite like certain elements of it, because the vision, the selling, the vision of the future, there's something they're typically very good at. They're
going warriors. Back to their strengths.
There's an overlap on the Venn diagram between brave warrior and wise monarch, which is visionary and compelling. And a lot of traditional entrepreneurial founders can sell chocolate to the Easter Bunny. They are just great natural salesmen. And so there's something when they get to that stage where they can go out back and selling again, but now they're selling to 2,000 employees rather than selling necessarily to a customer. So they tend to quite like that bit. What they struggle with more, if you're a brave warrior, is the wise bit of monarch. So you can look at any of the great, very famous fails of founders, naming no names, Neumann, for example, and it's a lack of humility and a lack of wisdom, and it's a believing their own hype. And this isn't just true for founders, it's true for all CEOs. CEOs who don't retain a dose of humility, who don't stay in a growth mindset, who believe their own hype and they believe that they know everything, they're the ones that really can come apart. And they will want to tell you, yes, but Elon Musk is like that, so I want to be like Elon Musk. My response to any founder who's using Elon Musk as a role model is, that's a little bit like saying you want to be Maradona. Maradona as a footballer, if you know who Maradona was, it's probably a bit old now, but Maradona was the best footballer of all time. He was born with a God-given talent. And even though all English people think he was a cheat, even English footballers say he was the best footballer of all time. He famously went on to become involved in the mafia, develop a cocaine addiction. He didn't exercise, he didn't train. He was just a total renegade. And he could get away with it because he was a once-in-a-lifetime God-given talent. Elon Musk can get away with it because he's a once-in-a-lifetime God-given talent. That is not what most footballers need to do. It's not what most founders need to do. Yeah. Most footballers need to be a bit more like Ronaldo, like discipline, show up, put the work in, be a good team. They need to work hard. So unfortunately, Elon Musk is the 99th percentile. Most founders are going to be in the middle. So you need to maintain a degree of humility, learning, growth mindset, openness, willingness to change. So that's the challenge to the brave warrior, is how do you retain that humility as you move into wise monarch. It's much more difficult for the considered architects to become wise monarchs. So that's much more difficult. They are really comfortable in the operational weeds of the business. So they will struggle to set really compelling strategy because they'll want to stay. I'm coaching one architect at the moment, and the company has, I think, 39 OKRs, but no strategic priorities, and everyone's exhausted. And that's because he wants to stay in the operational weeds. He likes the lines of code on the roadmap. So it's much more difficult for an architect to elevate back out, because that's where you need to let go of the operational detail. You need to trust that your C-suite are going to be responsible for the operational delivery.
And you have to go out there and inspire.
Exactly. Yeah. And so letting go of that control, letting go of that's what you're good at as well. By the time you get to that stage as an architect, you're really, really good at managing the detail and managing the operations. And so letting go of something you're good at, you've built that muscle, now you've got to use this one. So the superpowers of the architect phase become the kryptonite of the wise monarch phase. Mm-hmm. And that again is about recognizing, you may not, how are you going to meet the needs of your organization for strategic clarity, for vision, for an inspirational leader that people want to follow? Because that's what really being a wise monarch is about. It's about being a leader people want to follow. At that point, you're going to be leading people who you probably never met one-to-one. If you're leading 2,000-3,000 people, there's going to be hundreds of people you've never met. How are you going to communicate through everything you do? Every time there's a wonderful saying from the former CEO of Pepsi. And she was saying that her predecessor, when she got the job, gave her one piece of advice, which is when you get to Pepsi headquarters in the morning as CEO, as you walk across the quadrangle, whatever is happening, however bad it is, put a smile on your face, hold your head up high and walk, because there could be 3,000 people looking out of the window, and if they see you looking harried and stressed, they will say, oh God, the CEO of the business. So this is the monarch thing, the monarch shows up and they dress in a certain way and they hold themselves in a certain way and they move through public spaces in a certain way to instill confidence. So it's yes, it's at your all hand meetings. Yes, it's in your comms. Yes, it's in your, the things that you do when you're on TV and you're being interviewed by the press, but it's also how people see you as you wander around the office. It's also, it sounds crazy, it's what you wear. And I'm not suggesting that but if you wear a Rowan Finance Patagonia vest, it says one thing. And if you wear sandals and socks, it says another. If you wear a pinstripe suit, it says another thing. So the question isn't, what uniform should you wear as a CEO? It's you are communicating who you are as a leader in every choice that you make. Just make them thoughtfully.
Yeah, again, because you're not meeting every single person that joins the company anymore. And it's something that comes up with the later stage companies is how do we bottle what's great about the founder and sort of cascade it into the culture, and they sort of become a persona or a figurehead in the course of it. So
hopefully by that point, as you've gone through the build phase, you have started to think about culture, and you've already had the conversation with your people team or your leadership team about how do we distill what we have sort of done automatically into a set of values and a set of behaviors, and then plug them in across the organization. So hopefully that process has already begun. And then it becomes easier for the founder to start thinking about how do I become a role model of that? And what are my opportunities for communicating it? So, it's almost like an internal marketing exercise. What are my opportunities to communicate at all hands, in presentations, when I'm going to different offices, and really getting thoughtful about all of that.
Mm-hmm. Is there any, not to rate or say what's best, but of the best founders that you work with, or what are their habits and mindsets and things that you would want founders who are just beginning the journey to take into account as they start off?
It's two things. Sorry, it's a great question. The number one is what I would call a growth mindset. Growth mindset, which basically is being open. Open to different ways of doing things. And it's really difficult to get the balance between being, because what you need to do as a founder is you need to have a vision, and a compelling vision that you believe you can go and make. And that's a kind of like a force of will, a force of nature. And you need to balance that with being open to learn new things. And that's not easy.
Well, I guess you have to be somewhat resilient to criticism and rejection, right?
Exactly. So getting the balance right between being determined and willful, and also open to new ways of thinking and changing your mind. Having that balance between the two is one part of it. And the second part of it really is some self-awareness. So what most of us want to do is we want to, without recognizing it, we have our preferences and our beliefs, and we will look for evidence to support those beliefs, and we will try to argue that our way of doing things is the right way of doing things. Whereas if you have that open-mindedness and that action of sort of that habit of self-reflection, where you're kind of saying, well, what's my motivation here? Is it I just want to be right, or is this really what the company needs right now? Because sometimes I have founders that come to me and go, no, they need my vision. And everyone's saying, I don't know what we're doing. We've got no priorities. There's no plan. And they're like, they don't need any more vision. They need some clarity. But the founder will really hold on to, no, it's vision, it needs to be vision. So really having that process, having that habit of self-reflection and checking in and saying, why am I doing what I'm doing? Is it really what the organization needs, or am I just doing what I'm comfortable doing? Growth mindset, self-awareness, and then courage, bravery, and a great partner.
Yeah, I mean, founders, yeah. I think being a partner, being a co-founder, but being like a life partner.
I think having your tribe around you, crucially important. It's a really isolating role being a founder. So, you're co-founder, but there are going to be times when you and your co-founder aren't the best of friends either. So, having other founders in your ecosystem that you can turn to, they get you more than anybody else ever will. Being able to lean into your team and speak to your investors, speak to people like us, but have a good group of support around you, and hopefully you have that at home as well. Great friends, a great best friend, a great life partner. Mm-hmm. Make sure you're fully supported because you'll need it.